On October 9th, 2012, a school bus traveled through Pakistan's Swat Valley. Inside sat 15-year-old Malala Yousafzai. She carried her books, her dreams, and a belief that every girl deserved an education. But then the bus stopped. A masked gunman stepped inside and asked one question: "Who is Malala?" A bullet followed. The attack was designed to create a final outcome. The world was expected to see a frightened girl, a silenced voice, and a finished story. But expectation is only a prediction. It is not a verdict. Malala survived. From a hospital bed, she reclaimed her identity with 3 words: "I am Malala." 9 months later, she stood before the United Nations. The world may have expected anger. It may have expected revenge. Instead, Malala chose mission. She declared that she was there to defend the right of education for every child. That was the moment expectation broke. The impression was one that a young girl could be silenced. The expectation was that violence would end her mission. But Malala refused to surrender her future to someone else's prediction. One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Today, ask yourself, what expected outcome have you mistaken for destiny? Because the moment you separate what you know from what you predict, possibility returns. And when possibility returns, leadership begins. Good morning, leaders. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Leadership Brief. Today's enemy is expectation. An impression describes what we believe we see. An expectation predicts what we believe must happen next. Malala Yousafzai will show us what an expected future that has no authority until we surrender our ability to act. Today, we will separate prediction from possibility and strengthen our possibility capacity. In episode 5, we talked about Wilma Rudolph, and she taught us that an impression is not necessarily the truth. It's an interpretation that is formed from limited evidence. So your perception is what forms that impression. And that impression creates an interpretation which is not necessarily the truth. Now we're looking at prediction, and we're not trying to confuse an expected outcome with destiny. And when we see the repeat of an impression long enough, that's what becomes an expectation. We stop saying, "This is what I think I see," and begin saying, "This is what will happen." And that is the form of the enemy. Impression shapes perception. Expectation attempts to control the future. As always, we begin the day by standing tall, taking one controlled breath, becoming fully present. Today's word possibility, in terms of your intention, the one word intention that we set for each day, today's word is possibility for me. Choose your own word, write it down, speak it, embody it, share it with others. Now write the principle: expectation is a prediction, not a verdict. And today we will commit to testing one expectation, measuring the evidence, and encouraging another leader to ask, what else could be true? The word possibility is a space between what has been predicted and what can still be predicted. It does not mean ignoring facts or pretending that every outcome is likely. Possibility means remaining open to evidence, learning, and purposeful action. Write down one outcome you have already decided cannot change. So today's leadership question is, where has expectation stopped you from exploring? I want you to consider an expectation about a person, a decision, or your future. Where have you stopped listening, questioning, or acting because you believe you already know what will happen? Don't solve that yet. Just simply identify it. Now, returning to Malala. Malala grew up in Pakistan's Swat Valley, where extremists attempted to prevent girls from attending school. And the impression was that a young girl should remain small, obedient, and silent. From that impression came an expectation that fear would end her voice. But Malala saw another possibility. She believed that education could become more powerful than any form of violence. And the bullet that she took was meant to install that fear. The gunman who entered Malala's school bus and asked, "Who is Malala?" He intended to do more than just injure her body, It was meant for her to be silenced. And that outcome, which did not happen, was because of an expectation. And expectation becomes the enemy when we demand our obedience for all the evidence that has arrived. Obviously, Malala survived, and the survival was not the final transmission, and it was not the final transformation. From her hospital bed, she reclaimed her identity with the words, "I am Malala," and she could have chosen revenge, but instead she chose to become a focused leader on her mission. And what shocked the world was when she uttered those words, "I am not here to speak against the Taliban." Everyone expected revenge. And because she chose mission, that shock was scroll stopping and allowed for possibility. Her focus on one child, one teacher, one book, and one pen allowed a future that was not otherwise possible. So, thinking about expectation and what we want to see, it is not a verdict. Evidence is what informs us. Expectation is what we're predicting will happen. And that's where we have to be aware of our choice not to think about possibility, but to think about a rigid expectation happening. And from that, we have to think about the challenge of what our actions are. So purposeful action is what produces new evidence, and new evidence is what gives leaders the power to revise their decisions. When we think about expectation in terms of the field of action, expectation creates a constraint. And other people's expectations can assign roles, limits, or limit your future to you. And your expectations of other people can cause you to stop listening because you already believe you know what they will do. So, your expectations of future outcomes can cause you to protect the prediction instead of testing reality. And the enemy wins when prediction replaces curiosity. So the operating system that we want to install today is called the possibility reset. You're going to name, separate, question, then open, act, and record. So when you name, you're stating the expectation that's controlling the overall decision. When you separate it, you write down what's known versus what is predicted so that you can really identify the facts versus the projection. When you question, you're asking who's really created this prediction so that you can really determine whether or not it's coming from a voice inside you that's accurate. Then we look at opening a different possibility. We list one credible alternative outcome, and then we test that possibility through one small action that we act upon. And then finally, we're recording that new evidence and allowing it to help us revise the expectation. Okay. So when we put the expectation on trial, you create two columns. You label the first what I know, and in that column, you're going to place the observable facts, the direct statements, verified results, and current constraints. Then in the second column, you're going to write down what you predict. You're going to put in your interpretations, your fears, your past patterns, and unverified conclusions. And now, once you've done both of those, you can choose an action that you want to take to create new evidence. And you simply write it down below as one action I can take today that creates new evidence. And so here we get into possibility capacity. And this is your algorithm. You see, separate, test, and adapt. And this is the ability to stay level-headed with evidence so that the prediction basically gets verified and you're able to determine what the true possibilities are. So your challenge for today, the daily commitment, is to run a possibility reset. You're going to write down the expectation, circle every word that is prediction and not evidence. You're going to write one credible possibility you have not tested, and then you're going to schedule one test before the day ends. And it should be small enough that you can begin and clear enough to measure so that you're not overwhelmed by this and you're able to execute it successfully today. All right. So again, write it down. Before today ends, you will test one expectation. The behavior is really to look at the possibility to complete the test. Your metric that you're going to take is one action before the day closes. And your evidence is obviously, recording what changed or stayed true. And so now prediction becomes learning when the action produces the evidence. And I want you to share this with another leader, okay? Begin with your one word intention for the day. My word is possibility. I'm sharing it with you. Then you're going to commit. The expectation I will test. And finally, you're going to encourage a leader with that expectation evidence and share with them and ask what else can be true. So today's executive takeaway: separate what you know from what you predict. Then take one action that creates new evidence. A predicted future has no authority until you surrender your action. Malala refused to surrender her mission to someone else's expectation, and her action reopened possibility for millions of people. Tomorrow we will confront the next enemy, which is limitation. And we'll find out what happens when an expectation is repeated so often that it becomes a boundary. Until then, I want you to test the prediction, create the evidence, and win your day.